Hello and welcome back to Here Protect Life. Uh, Welcome back to the conversation, Disrupting the Consensus. And today I am really delighted to be able to welcome Junior Minister at the Office of the First Minister and Deputy First Minister, Ian Paisley Jr, a man carrying one of the most resonant names in politics in Ireland. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Hello, Michael. Nice to be here, and thank you for your welcome. And it's good to be in your show. I'm now the Member of Parliament for North Antrim, and my junior minister role in OFM DFM has ceased a few years ago. But I hope that I've made a few marks there.
And my own fault for believing Wikipedia, I suppose. You're the MP for one of the most beautiful places on the island, and I envy you. I drove back through there coming back from Donegal one time recently, and it's absolutely stunning. It's a lovely place to be.
Absolutely beautiful. Every time I take a walk along that coastal path and look at it and see maybe a lovely sunset or something, I always tell my kids, God's an artist. Only an artist could paint that and draw that, and it's fantastic a place and the freshest air anywhere in the world.
So, what was it like to grow up with I mean, not just with your name, but in that family, a remarkable family of remarkable people? What was that like to be? You were the youngest, is that right?
Yeah, I'm the youngest of five. I have a twin brother and three sisters, and I suppose looking in, it must have been quite traumatic. But actually being in that eye of that storm or whatever it was to me it was just a normal family life. My father was essentially a pastor of a church, and I was brought up as a pastor's child. And that was first and foremost what our home was. It was very much the minister's manse, and seeing the issues that affected ordinary folk who were in dire straits and needed help. And of course, my father was also simultaneously a very prominent public figure and minister, not only minister of religion, which made him very prominent in his ministry, but also his political activities. He was, from I was about the age of 4, he was a member of Parliament, both at Stormont in the old Parliament and a member then of the Westminister Parliament from 1970. And so it was a very, very public life, but to us it was a very normal life with a very happy family childhood, and we had a very warm and loving parents who brought us up and just taught us the important things in life.
How much did just the practicalities of politics intrude into the family? I mean, he was a minister, he was a politician, but he was also famously a master of being a constituency MP. And being a constituency MP in the north of Ireland, a bit like the Republic, more so perhaps than in England, it involves a lot of human contact.
Yeah, look, Dad was a master of being a voice for ordinary people, understanding them. And what I learned from him, I suppose, was you make time for people. It's utterly a privilege to be their voice and to be able to articulate their feelings and their views. But the only way you can do that is if you actually make space for them and you use your ears and you listen to them. And it was very much, that he probably taught all his kids that, to really listen to the people around you and be instinctive and understand what we would call the actual gut, the heart and soul of people, and understand it. You only do that if you talk to folk and you're open and you're accessible. There was never anything lofty about my father, and yet I've seen other people who behaved very entitled and behaved in a way as if they were something of importance. And yes, to a superficial level they were. But my father never ever lost that sense of being rooted in a community and understanding people. And yet he could, if you like, he could work with ordinary folk, and he could dine with presidents and kings and understand them also. And it's having that ability to do that, which is a remarkable skill.
Rooted, I suppose, a lot of the people who are like that are people who know who they are themselves.
Yeah. And have a good sense probably of their own self-awareness, and what people see them. I mean, I remember it was another very prominent politician who said that Ian Paisley was the only person who he felt shy in front of because he had such presence in the room. And yet my father would not have known that he had that. Well, he would have known he had that presence, but he wouldn't have lauded it on someone. He would have just been himself. And being able to carry that is it's a remarkable skill. It's a charisma. It's a personality thing. It looks terrible when it's mimicked, and
Yes.
when people try to pretend they have it, and it looks absolutely brilliant when it's for real and it's authentic.
So you're growing up. You go to the Methodist College, Methody as they call it. So were you a scholar or a rugby player or both?
I hope I was a wee bit of both. I hope I was a club man, as we would say, you know.
Yeah.
And that I certainly enjoyed my sport. I enjoyed it. I was an oarsman in one of my years that I was at Methody. I enjoyed on the river. And then, of course, like everyone in Methody, you ultimately end up in the rugby team. And I certainly enjoyed playing rugby. We had a great game with Blackrock College and other establishments from the Republic, and we entertained. I remember one time, you'll love this, whenever a team came up from the south, if they were staying over, it would be guys would say, look, I can put one guy or two guys up in my house, we'll look after them. And so there was this host team that went on, and I felt so sorry for these two lads come up from Blackrock College, and I said I can take two of them to our house and stay at the manse, and they'd no idea who they were staying with. Got them into the minibus, got them dropped off at our house. Now, in those days, our house had more security around it than the Pentagon.
Right.
There was an armed guard, there was a military armed guard, then there was a police armed guard, there was barbed wire everywhere. And there was security lights and guys with submachine guns walking around the place. Just a normal Northern Ireland home. And the guys would come in, and then there was quite a prominent portrait of my dad in the hallway as you come into the house. And I think at that point the penny dropped with the fellas.
Right.
You know, where the heck are we? You know, I don't think they slept a wink that night. The rugby game was completely terrible the next day. It was a very good tactic, and the coach said, in future you can come and send the whole team to your house.
But still a great story for them to tell, which I'm sure they still tell today.
Oh, they dine out on it. I'm sure they dine out on it, you know. The important thing, Mike, it was really happy memory. I had a very, very happy childhood, very, very happy schooling. It was rooted very much in good, sound family values, you know, where, you know, and we would, as a family, would pray together. Religion wasn't forced down our throat, but it was made very clear to us that, you know, in our household, putting God first and understanding values which come from God, very sound values which are encapsulated in the 10 Commandments. Those values were taught to us, but they were lived to us by example by very good godly parents, and something which I really cherish, and something which I hope as a parent I can give to my children and they can give to their children, because it's the good folk in your life that really make you, and it's their good example. And you know, my schooling was really good. It was really enjoyable, and it got me at Queen's University, and also got a diploma from the Harvard, and I think that I had a good grounding in terms of that. But I loved my sport at school, and I wish I was still young and able to play now.
You did history and Irish politics in Queen's, yeah, and then you did a master's in social science. You come out of, you graduate, you do your master's. Had it always been in your head that you would be a politician? Was that a natural thing to do, or was it in fact the last thing you ever thought of doing?
It certainly wasn't the last thing. I really loved the political engagement. I loved going to political rallies when I was a kid. I loved getting involved in elections and an election activity. And that very much was a family event, you know, making up posters and going out, putting them up, distributing literature, learning the skills of talking to people and being a salesman and saying, this is the policy, this is what's not, this is why we're doing it. And trying to learn the art of persuading people to come your way. And I loved all that, and I enjoyed it. And I initially thought that I'd maybe end up in journalism as a columnist or something like that, writing opinions. And certainly in my early days, I thought of that, and certainly thought of a career in law. But very quickly after university, an opportunity arose where I'd become a press officer for a campaign team for soldiers that, in our view, had been unlawfully imprisoned.
Mm-hmm.
And I documented that case and ended up writing a book about it. It was published by Mercier Press in Cork. And I was very fortunate in that I knew Robert Key, the very famous historian.
Yes.
And Robert had taken an interest in this case. And he kindly wrote the foreword of that book for me. And that gave me a taste of really meaningful campaigning, but also documenting and writing about it, and knowing that by doing that you could achieve things. And we were very successful. 3 of those soldiers had their convictions quashed on an appeal, and my book played some part in that. So I got a taste for that immediately out of university. And then opportunities arose whilst I was working in the party to really get involved in politics. And I was heavily involved in my branch of the Democratic Unionist Party. And I eventually then in 1996 stood for election to the Northern Ireland Forum. And that really then started me on a road where I've been elected really every time since 1996. So over 20 years. Where did it go?
You've been a professional politician for that time. Now, one of the things, reasons why we're talking to you right now, I suppose, is there has been quite some activity in Northern Ireland regarding the life issue. I think I'm right in saying that the DUP is the only party with representation in Stormont and in Westminster that is a pro-life party.
We are proudly pro-life, and indeed whipped. So it's discipline. You must vote pro-life. So even if you've got different ideas or different views, if you want to stay in the party, stay under the rules of the party and be active in the party, this is the way you will vote on this issue. So, and it's because it's about life and death. It's not an issue which is about conscience. I must say, I get quite fed up when I hear this. So, I can be, I can have a conscientious objection to life. Really? No, you can't. This is about life and death. And, if this was about any other subject that was important, you'd want us to whip you on it on a social matter. Well, this isn't about social matters. This is about life and death, and we will whip our members on it.
Now, it had been the case that the law that was introduced in the rest of the United Kingdom in the end of the 60s had not been applicable to Northern Ireland. I think that certainly in a large part because of campaigning by your father and other people to stop it being extended into the north. In the absence, as I understand it, of Stormont, the pro-abortion faction used this opportunity to change the law in Westminster. Can you just explain to the listener what the dispensation was before and what the process was? It brought it Westminster and what Westminster has done now, what it has imposed, if you like, on the north.
Yes, and thank you for the opportunity to be able to do this, because it is a very important issue, and it transcends party politics. It transcends, I suppose, individual party affiliations also, because it is so important. You're absolutely right. 1967, the law in the United Kingdom changed to basically allow permissive abortions under certain circumstances. Northern Ireland had its own fully functioning parliament, and it was able to object and say, on this matter, the ethos and identity of Northern Ireland is so very, very different than this. We could not permit that, and our Northern Ireland Parliament did not permit it in 1967. And as a result of that, 100,000 people are alive today in Northern Ireland because Northern Ireland objected in 1967 to the beginning of abortions at a mass scale. In England, Scotland and Wales, unfortunately, it's very different. About 250,000 abortions take place every year. And that's tragic. It's tragic for the woman who finds herself in a situation where she feels the only thing to do is to terminate pregnancy and to end a life that's growing miraculously inside her. It's tragic for the families, and it's also tragic for the medical staff who have to do this also. Because, my understanding of medics is that they're there to try and preserve life, and to turn that on its head and to make a change it just is so Alice through the looking glass conundrum that people have to face. So I don't say these things as if it's easy and people make easy decisions. I understand the trauma people find themselves in, and probably we have a society now that isn't able to say, stop, take a breath and think, and here are other better options, and here are better consequences. We just have this mad rush to do things. So fast forward, if you like, to about 3 years ago, our Northern Ireland Assembly unfortunately collapsed.
Mm-hmm.
They've been running quite well for about 10 years. They've been reasonably stable. It collapsed, and the government was engaged in a negotiation to try and re-establish the power-sharing executive at Stormont, which we all like to see working, because it's better having Northern Ireland people running Northern Ireland affairs. And the issue of abortion would have always been a matter that Parliament would have debated and would have held to and have ruled on, irrespective of what was happening in England. Unfortunately, with the Parliament being down, or the Assembly being down, a very hardline pro-abortion group in England seized the opportunity, and through a series of amendments to domestic law happening in England, they amended it to allow for certain new abortion rights to occur in Northern Ireland. So badly written was that legislation, and so quickly passed without consideration, almost as a punishment to the people of Northern Ireland. It actually introduced the most permissive abortion rules and regulations. Basically anything goes for Northern Ireland. Regulations, no regulations in place, nothing set up in terms of where doctors or nurses should even be engaged in how this would be managed.
Yeah.
No arrangements whatsoever, just a completely permissive arrangement. And then we had this massive rush to put in place the regulations to try and manage this, and to try and make it very much more manageable. Which, in my view, is the last place we really want to be, but that was where the government brought in their management regulation scheme. They brought it in under the guise of, for human rights reasons, this had to be done because they had a treaty obligation under a committee for women's rights and equalities coming out of Europe, and they had to therefore act very, very quickly.
That's just an excuse. It's a nonsense, though.
Absolutely. There's no law in Europe that tells us we have to change this abortion law, none whatsoever. Government has accepted there's no treaty breach taking place.
Yeah.
This is basically expediency to appeal to a particular hardline pro-abortionist lobby. And indeed, just this week in Parliament, one of those pro-abortionists said, this is only the beginning. This is only the beginning. We have much more to do and much more to achieve. Right. And we have people, MPs in England, who are saying now that Northern Ireland has the most permissive abortion laws, we want them for their public, for Great Britain. So that they've actually turned this thing completely on its head now. A couple of weeks ago, the Northern Ireland Assembly had a very good debate on the matter. They debated the regulations, and they, an outright majority, 46 against 40, voted in opposition to these new regulations. And also, if you actually take the two amendments that were passed, you actually had a total of 76 members of a 90-member body assembly saying they objected to these changes per se. Right. We brought that to Westminister, and we said that's overwhelming. It's cross-community. There was members of the SDLP, members of Sinn Féin, members of my own party, members of the Unionist Party, members of the Alliance, who voted on these various votes to indicate opposition to certain regulations. And we said to Westminister, this law, these regulations, you cannot now push them through because it's wrong. But unfortunately, the government, in its blindfolded loyalty to something that is just absolutely awful for the people of Northern Ireland, they decided that they would progress and push this legislation through. So we now have, as I say, a very permissive regime. Now, what does it mean? It's permissive in a number of different ways. First of all, you don't have to give a reason for an abortion. Now, under the 1967 legislation, you actually do have to give a reason. But for Northern Ireland, no reason is given. Now, why is that important? Is that just a technical thing? It's very important because we outlaw in the United Kingdom sex choice as an abortion issue. So if you had discovered after your first test that you were having another girl or another boy, and you actually didn't want that, you would not be allowed to say, well, my reason for terminating this pregnancy is because I don't want this sex of a child born. And sex selection terminations are completely and totally outlawed. and they are barbaric in my view. And they ultimately discriminate more against women than against men, because
Yes.
people will ultimately make the choice that they prefer to have a boy.
Well,
And
we've seen this in China and in India and many other countries.
absolutely,
there are millions of missing girls.
absolutely, it's just right. And this will allow sex selection terminations in Northern Ireland. It's also incredibly permissive and absolutely insulting to anyone with a disability. Right up to the point of birth, you can now choose to terminate the pregnancy if you discover a disability, and it's any disability.
Up to birth.
Up to birth. So a cleft lip, a club foot, something wrong with a toe, anything which could be described as a disability. You do not need to have the permission of a doctor to have a termination in Northern Ireland. In England, Scotland and Wales, a doctor must give, because you need 2 medical practitioners, which is a much lower standard, so and much easier for people to do. And of course, if a doctor makes a wrong decision, for example, if he says, I'm not allowing you to do this, or this is wrong, or the midwife or whatever says, no, this is wrong, but we're doing this, your choice is wrong, they would not, the punishment, the maximum punishment would not be life imprisonment as it is in England, or a custodial sentence, a very serious custodial sentence, or indeed as it is in the Republic of Ireland, up to 14 years custodial sentence if the doctor practices wrongly. In Northern Ireland, they've decided to reduce it to the most meaningful level 5 penalty fine. In other words, a fine of about £3,000, £4,000. And as I said in Parliament, so we can buy our way out of terminating a life, that's going to be allowed. So it's just a grotesque vista that has been opened up, and something which I think will be challenged in the courts. The Northern Ireland Attorney General has indicated that this is unworkable, that it can't work, it's got to be changed. The Northern Ireland Assembly, I hope, will be able to get back stuck into it and try to unpick some of this, but it's incredibly difficult territory that we're now in.
Okay, say one of the issues we're interested in here is helping people to most effectively lobby and how to effectively change. I mean, we are where we never wanted to be, but this is where we are. I think you've been with the Family in Life. You've perhaps been to the United States. I know your colleague Paul Given was over there, and maybe the Americans have in that kind of experience is useful to see what how they've proceeded in the United States. The first thing we learn, I suppose, from the States is you don't give up.
That's right. Never give up. Have that in your heart and soul. I mean, this is a battle that's worth fighting for forever. And of course, where it's something which we must remember, that there will always be another fight. There will always be another potential opportunity. But you're absolutely right. First of all, I must commend Family in Life as an organisation. They've been very good in saying, look, this has to be a collective voice of across the entire identity of Ireland, North and South. And they've very generously taken me to the United States on a number of occasions and asked me to lobby jointly with senators and TDs from the Republic of Ireland and to make the case. And it's been a privilege to work with the men and women from the Republic of Ireland who have done that with us and allowed us to share those platforms and to say, this is just something which cuts across. And it has an impact that, especially in Washington and New York, where people would expect us to be on very different sides. When we come into the room, we tell the same message and we make the same passionate address to them. They recognise, gosh, that this really has touched something. And if you like, the whole of Ireland has been a very special place in terms of being so pro-life for so long, and to be the last countries to really go through this very seismic constitutional changes for us, I think does give us a certain presence at the moment and a certain opportunity that we should grasp. But working together on this has been a real privilege, and we must keep it up.
Going forward, I think one of the things that, in the sense that talking to people who've been working in the North with the Family in Life, is that one of the things we have to try and do is to amplify as much as we can and to support where we can those politicians that we know are pro-life, so that increasingly that when people go to Westminster, now obviously there are political parties. I mean, I don't want to get political about this, but like Sinn Féin, who obviously believe very strongly that power should be based in Westminster, and that's where we should listen, rather than to listen to the people, the voice of the people of the north of Ireland. But if that voice, which can be expressed politically and can be heard politically with parties like, say, the DUP, or aim to, if and when they get people elected who are explicitly pro-life, but we have to make sure that that voice is as loud as we can make it. So if there are people in the north of Ireland who are listening to this today, and you wanted to give them advice, what is the most effective way of talking to a politician that you want, rather than just, sometimes I think people can maybe indulge themselves, vent their passions, their emotions in a way that isn't actually advancing their cause. How would you say is the best way to approach your local council or your local MLA, your local MP?
Well, first of all, I believe in people power, and I believe in the collective of people power. And if you want to change things, you've got to actually take actions to change things. And that means campaigning. It also means very directly having a connection with that politician, whether it's at local authority level, at the Assembly or Dáil or the National Parliament, to make sure that you actually approach them directly. Now, you're absolutely right. There's no point hectoring them and telling them I'll never vote for you, all the rest of it. The best way I always find, and the thing that has most impact with me as a constituency representative, is if one of my voters, one of the people who come to me and say, I vote for you, but I want you to do this, and I want you to support this, or I will change my mind. And if people know that actually the one commodity I chase as a politician is votes. Sure. That's our cash. That people vote for us, that gets us into Parliament. If I find out that I'm losing that, I'm doing something wrong, because I'm to be your voice. So how do I maintain you? And it's by listening to those folk, and by making sure that you actually represent their views, and you represent them authentically and legitimately. And so I'd say that the strongest weapon anyone has is to be as wise as a serpent and as harmless as a dove. Yeah. To tell the politician, I'm one of your best supporters. There's 7 votes in my house. When you tell my extended family and they listen to me, there's maybe X, Y, Z number of votes in my family. We want to know, will you do the following? Will you support the following? And then get them to commit to it in writing. Get them to say, well, look, I'm going to write to you. Can you email me back that that's what you're going to do? Mm-hmm. So as you have them, and you have almost a contract with them, and tell them that you're prepared to use that. Now, I used that tactic very deliberately and unashamedly recently, and when the Northern Ireland Assembly was going to have this debate 3 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, on the abortion regulations. And I had a constituent who wrote to me and said, I want to know how you're voting. I said, well, look, you know how I'm voting on this. I'm pro-life. You've got no issues with me. And you'll have no issues with my 24 colleagues in the Northern Ireland Assembly. They will be whipped to vote on this. But I said, in this constituency, there's 4 other MLAs.
Right.
In every other constituency, there's 5 MLAs. Why don't you write to every single one of them nicely and mannerly, and just ask them how they're going to vote, and could they explain? And if they come back with the following answers, oh, this isn't really relevant, or Westminster did this, it's not really for us, I said, challenge them neatly on these points. And I gave this lady the issues to do. She very studiously wrote to all 90 MLAs. Right. And she got answers. And then whenever she got answers back which didn't satisfy her, she went back to them. And she eventually forced, and I know that this lady directly was responsible for forcing 3 MLAs to commit to her that they would vote. Now, we won that vote. We were expecting to get about 41, 42 votes. We got 46.
Right.
That lady was directly responsible because she put so much pressure and had a very cogent argument and was very mannerly about how she did it. But she basically called them out. She said, you're saying this isn't relevant, that this goes to Westminster, but you will actually have a vote, and Westminster could listen to you. Surely your vote, and if you're telling me that morally you're with me in this, but really you would just ignore the vote, that's not good enough. And she really pressed them and got them. And I believe that one of the members of the Alliance Party, for instance, who was going to sit in his hands, actually ended up supporting this as a result of that woman's direct lobbying. And I know of others who were persuaded by her as well. So that is how real politics works on the ground, using the strength of my vote, my commodity can change your mind.
I think that I would say very definitely the message there is too often there's a sense with all of us maybe that somebody else will do it.
Yeah.
That there's somebody in Belfast, there's someone in Dublin, there's someone in London, there's a big building and it's full of people and they're doing this. So I don't have to do it. But ultimately, the only person you can be sure is yourself.
Yeah.
And if you know you've done it, well, then you can be happy with your conscience. You know you've done what you can do, and others can work.
I get hundreds of emails every day. Now, I look at my own emails. I don't have an office manager dealing with them. I like to have that direct communication. But I'll tell you one thing. See if one of the addresses is from my constituency. I'll give you an example. On a later this year, I did something recently for British Airways staff and their rights under the new contract that's being brought in. And I spoke in Parliament about it. I got hundreds of emails about it from British Airways staff all over the UK. And whilst it was lovely to get all this adulation from British Airways staff over the UK, the only letters that were really interested in me and the emails that were interested in me were the ones that had postal codes from my constituency. You know, I'm so-and-so from Ballymena, I'm so-and-so from Ballymena. Those ones there, instantaneous response.
Yes.
I spoke to them. If I got a number, I rang them because they were local to me and they mattered to me more than anyone else. And make no mistake about it, if a politician gets something and it is in their patch and they know this person is a potential voter, but they could either continue to win or lose by their actions, that can make the difference to that politician. And never ever lose out. If you can get 10 or 20 doing it, get members from your own family doing it, it makes a big difference.
They start to pick, I mean, I think this is politics the world over. If you, whether it's knocking on the door at a canvas, or if it's at a clinic, or whether it's letters, you start to see a pattern that this one and that one and the other one, and they're not from all over there, but from my constituency. People are voting for me. People are giving me number ones.
Yeah.
People inevitably sit up and take notice.
And Michael, I've seen it the other way as well. I've seen it, you know, on issues where you get support from unexpected quarters. So in the last election, I was very privileged to have one of my nominees. As you know, you have to get 10 people to nominate you to stand for Parliament. Bernie Smith, a very prominent pro-life campaigner. Bernie said to me, and I've worked with Bernie for years now, she's a brilliant lady, and she said to me, Ian, that she would be willing to sign my public nomination paper. Now, in Northern Ireland, that's a big thing. I'm a staunch Protestant, unionist. Bernie is from the Roman Catholic tradition. And I don't know what her politics are beyond that, but I'd say I could make a guess. And she said to me, I'm prepared to sign your nomination. Now, to me, it was an honour that a lady of her calibre from the different tribe said to me she was prepared to do it. And it also then said to the people in my constituency who are from that faith, who are from the Roman Catholic faith, Roman Catholic tradition, if one of your people from your tribe is prepared to stand up and back this man for this reason and this reason only, that there should be persuasive enough for you to change. I have absolutely no doubt that as a result of that and my own work on the pro-life campaigning, that has persuaded many Roman Catholics in my constituency to vote for me. And I can say it with knowledge, because the local priest in my constituency has written to me and told me this, that many of his parishioners say that they go to Mr. Paisley because he does this and he supports this. And I get many letters from people telling me that. And I think that then is something which will really help break down barriers, because as I said right at the beginning, Michael, this isn't about petty politics.
No,
this is life.
I also think that this kind of public statement, if nothing, it also does something very valuable. I think it puts other political parties that may thought that they had votes in their pockets. You know, that back in the days when I used to canvass myself, you'd be with an old fella and he'd say, "Oh, I know, these are all right. We have 3 votes here. Oh, there's no point going up there. We won't get a vote out of that." You know, there was this sense that you could know. I was talking to an old college friend of mine recently. I hadn't come across him for a long time, in Fermanagh, and he said to me, we're just chatting about things, and he just out of nothing in particular, he said, "Well, actually, myself and my wife voted DUP in the last election because they were the only pro-life party." Now, these are 2 very serious
Yeah.
about their faith.
Yeah.
And they said that they felt they had no choice, that this was the number one issue. And now I wonder also perhaps that you're getting this to an extent because of the kind of MP you are. I know that I remember back in the days when I was in college, we would hear stories from the lads in the north talking about your father, and they said everybody knew his politics,
Mm.
but he was also had a reputation that if you were one of his constituents, he didn't care who you were or where you were from,
Yeah.
that he was a knight that would go into battle for you,
Oh,
and if he could fight for you, he would fight for you, and
oh,
that
listen,
all
I'll
of his
break my back. I'll break my back for any of my constituents, and
exactly.
that's the terror that government offices have. When I come in the door, get on the phone or email them, they know that I don't give a stuff about the background of the individual I'm representing. They're my constituent, and I will fight them, fight for them to get their rights achieved. And that was something that was instilled in me because, as I say right at the beginning, I was privileged to end up being a voice for my constituents.
Do you think?
But I think that there is this issue has definitely. I've seen a tide change because, frankly, the point you've made, Michael, about being taken for granted. A lot of nationalists, ordinary, decent, devout nationalists, just felt they've been taken for granted here, and people aren't listening to us. And that fella Paisley is, and I definitely got a sense that, and some of my colleagues across other constituents felt they got the same thing. My colleague in East Antrim, Sammy Wilson, my colleague in South Antrim, Paul Gerfin, and others have all said that they've picked that up and they've noticed it.
I'm just wondering that maybe, now I'm not saying talking about massive percentages, but in tight elections, that do you think that it would be, without the party changing its particular character or compromising on its principles, that it can evolve in a way to make it friendlier, shall we say, to a Catholic vote, to say, listen, we share this one fundamental belief in common, which is more important than everything else, and we actually welcome your vote in a sense that maybe make people, because that could be a game changer in the north in different constituencies.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think that, that's a challenge to us as unionists. I mean, if I passionately believe in the union, it's got to be a union for everyone. It's got to be a union which keeps all of my neighbours in a state where they're contented. And a true unionist would be doing that, should be working towards that. And I feel like the Troubles masked all of that for so long, but we're now so many years distance from that we now really have a challenge to make the case. And I'd say the ball's at our foot, and we should do it. And we should do it without fear or favour. And yes, it is a duty and it is a task in front of us, and it's a task for me to demonstrate to people from different traditions and with different views that, you know, I'm there to represent their views, and I understand them as much as I understand if I got reaction about the community that I came from. Sure. And it's a great challenge, and it's something which I really relish, actually, and I think it's something that will make a difference. I think it in very tight constituencies it could be decisive, but I think it will make a difference.
Just before I go, there is something. We are living in strange times, shall we say?
Yes.
In these islands and across Europe, we seem to have imported from the United States a moral panic. There's people are protesting, people are rioting, people seem to feel very passionate about change. But one of the things that's been going on in the last while is this desire to, I don't know if it's even rewrite history, but to expunge history. I don't know if you saw Gladstone, a hall in Liverpool University called after William Ewart Gladstone, the great Prime Minister.
Yeah.
He's going to be taken away because his father, not he, but his father was a slave owner. There was a statue in Bristol, which was a statue of a prominent slave trader, a man who made himself very wealthy out of the slave trade, was knocked over and thrown into the river. The statue of Winston Churchill was defaced, and he was called a fascist, which I think would have been news to the people in London in the Blitz in 1942 that Winston Churchill was a fascist. I wonder if the people of this island, and particularly the people in Northern, maybe have a hard-earned lesson to teach people about living with history rather than pretending history never happened. I mean, I'm throwing this at you. Maybe it's unfair, but do you have an opinion
I
about
do.
this?
I think we've got to avoid. I mean, history is not a pleasant place to be, but history is a place to learn from, so that the future can be more pleasant. And I think the idea that we can have a pure view of what has happened in the past is just nonsense. You know, we've got to recognise warts and all the past. I mean, when I walk into Parliament every day, there's a statue of Oliver Cromwell. For
A man
many people,
who will provoke different reactions with different people.
Not only does he provoke different reactions in different parts of Ireland because of the history, he provokes very different reactions in parts of England. I mean,
Sure.
anti-royalist, a Republican, essentially.
Killed the king.
Yeah, and here we are, you know, walking into a Parliament where my sovereign is the Queen.
Yes.
It's remarkable. But it's a history we've got to understand and learn, understand what has evolved from that. We should never judge the past through the lens of the present.
Right.
We should understand it. And certainly as an historian by training, that has always been my view. And it's pure ignorance to do that. Now, whether it's right and proper to have statues in prominent places of certain people, I think that is a legitimate public debate.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something people should have. I mean, I remember the very symbolic removal of the statue of Saddam whenever
yes.
that country was relieved. Was it right that that was torn down? Who would have dared to say it was wrong? The removal of that symbolic of division, that symbol of division, the Berlin Wall. You know, so there are times whenever you've got to then judge those moments as moments. Now, the willy-nilly removal and expunging of history is just wrong. We should try to understand it, but we do need to, I think, be at least open to the public debate on there's a place for these statues also, but there's also a place for them not to be.
Yes.
If they are offensive, and we've been through it. I mean, in this island, there was a statue of Queen Victoria in Dublin, which was blown up, if you remember. In Belfast, there was a statue of a man called Cook, the great Henry Cook, the Black Man, as he was called, and that was destroyed and then rebuilt. So we've been through this in our own past, but it reminds me a bit of book burning. I don't always like what's written in certain books, but
sure.
I don't think I should burn them. I think I should maybe learn how to argue against them.
Yeah, I think as a historian, as you say, your training is as a historian. There's a phrase which is going around now, decolonizing your bookshelf, which is basically a pre-book burning. And my problem with, to the extent, I mean, it's not my business what the people of Bristol want to do with their statues. It seemed like a nice statue, and I very much doubt that the people of Bristol passed it by and thought, "Oh, look, up for there's a slave trader. That's great. We're fond of saying." Rather, they just saw a nice statue. But
I'll tell you a funny story, Michael. When we were kids, and my dad was an avid reader,
mm-hmm.
and incredibly, the library of over 80,000 books when he died. But so it had a huge collection of books. But he also every day and every week would read periodicals and newspapers. The newspapers my father would read would not be the ones that you would expect a unionist to be reading. And his newsagent was constantly perplexed because he would always get the Catholic Herald.
Right.
He'd always get the Guardian. He'd always get these things that were left with New Statesman. He'd read them. And anytime he's challenged, why are you reading that stuff? He says, I know what I am, I know what I believe, but I need to know what other people believe so as I can challenge it. And, you know, would I want to remove those things that teach me about what others believe and understand what others believe? It's only through understanding what others believe I can truly understand what I believe and know what I believe. And that idea that we should be removing, but it's just wrong. It's just wrong.
Also, that's been done by people without the consent of it. Yeah. It's not been done as the result of a discussion. I mean, it's a silly example. I was talking to a friend recently, and I had a very negative, very black and white attitude. Then somebody said, "Well, there's a statue in Brussels to King Leopold."
Yes. Yeah.
And I thought, "Oh yeah, actually,
yeah.
Probably
when you start a virtuous circle, it becomes a corkscrew."
Yeah, because you know, I can see very good reasons why there should not be a statue to King
Mm,
Leopold,
yeah.
who whose responsibility for the Belgian Congo was absolutely horrific. But ultimately, the idea that you know the police stand back and you let a mob do this is maybe worrying some. Listen, before we go, just going forward,
Yeah.
this is going to go back to it's going to go back to Parliament. We're going to go back to Westminster. What will that look like? What's going to happen there?
Well, there's going to be another vote on abortion next week, and that will be in these regulations. Look, without a miracle, I expect that vote to be lost. But I just know that all of the Democratic Unionist members that are here will vote against it. We'll probably get a number of very prominent Tory and Labour members who take the same view as us, and we'll get a handful of them. But unfortunately, and it saddens me to say this, England and Scotland are really lost in this issue. They have the notion that the unborn life is not even talked about in those terms.
Yes.
Is not even considered to be, you know, precious. Has unfortunately long since been removed from the identity of the people in this island, and that's very sad. We in Northern Ireland are very peculiar because of what we say in Parliament about it, and we're looked at as if we're very odd and we're criticised for it. But that criticism has never bothered me. I think you've got to do what is right. So we'll fight it again next week. We'll try and persuade people to support us, and we'll hopefully probably move part of this to the courts and challenge it and see what opportunities arise after it. But the battle will always go on. The battle will always
go
on. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, I'd like to thank Ian Paisley Jr. I'd like to thank you for joining us tonight. As you know, the fight goes on, as we say. We are working away here in the Republic and in Northern Ireland. We're working with our friends in the United States. At this time, we need your help. If you can help us in any way, that would be really appreciated. You'll see a little button there. We'd ask you to like the channel, and if you can help us out, there's a little button there for donations. If anything at all is really appreciated in the fight as it goes on. But anyway, I'd like to thank you again, Ian, and wish you all a good night. God bless, and stay safe.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for the opportunity, and God bless you. Bye-bye.